So in this video, I'm going to give a bit more of like an updated view on what I think about schizophrenia and psychoses or as a whole. Just because I'm learning more as I study psychology, I kind of gain better insight, sort of using my own experiences as a compass to navigate the literature and just find my way through in a sense that provides clarity. Trying to build up a worldview that is in line with the literature. Now we're in this new age of science, more, less so than spirituality, just to try and blend everything together. And I wanted to share some pretty cool stuff that I've learned. So if you saw my paper the other day, or you see my schizophrenia hypothesis video, you'll know that what I talk about is very well grounded in scientific research, but there's a bit of a different perspective that I have, which is that, again, this goes in line with the literature, but that it's not a genetic condition. And so I'm really going to just today elaborate on what I mean by all this and try to make a picture that's a little bit more hopeful and also something that's quite encouraging. Maybe we can come together on this and try to find a better pathway for people with the condition. That's what I really hope to do. But so first, we're kind of told as a culture that schizophrenia is a genetic disease and it's neuroprogressive a lot of the time. So when people get diagnosed with schizophrenia, or even when they have psychoses, there is a lingering fear over them that they're going to progress into something much worse and it's going to just, go on and on and on forever. And that's the biomedical model. That is the model that prescribes antipsychotics and says, look, there's a neurochemical imbalance in the brain that can only be fixed by blocking neuroreceptors to stop the uptake of dopamine in the striatum and this sort of thing. But as you look through the literature of schizophrenia and psychoses, what you'll find is that the hereditary component, so when they say schizophrenia is a hereditary condition, isn't in the sense that it's passed down through family members. Like, if you've got a parent who is schizophrenic, you would think with that logic the child would be schizophrenic, that it's hereditary. But in that scientific world, hereditary doesn't mean what we think, which is passed down through parents. Hereditary is a term describing a group analysis, is what they call exome studies, of individuals who have schizophrenia controlled against normal healthy people, and then deciphering which genes are the ones that are the most commonly found in schizophrenic populations. And so it's hereditary in the sense that it's people who have these certain genes that develop the condition, not necessarily that it's passed down. And you can see quite an interesting point of that, where childhood onset schizophrenia, something that I believe to be a different condition completely, is only in this large exome studies, 1% of the childhood onset schizophrenic cases have a parent with schizophrenia. And so that's quite interesting because that kind of changes the story a little bit, or at least the feeling of what we would perceive as hereditary, to more of a, well, what is that about, right? Where did that novel condition essentially come from? From healthy parents, And so what they found is in childhood onset cases is that there is de novo mutations. So de novo means novel, new mutations in DNA. And so that results in the very extreme early cases that we see. But with adulthood onset schizophrenia, typically between 18 to 25 years old, very specifically within that time period in the literature, it's a bit more complex because people who have been observed in these large exome studies, there are plenty of people, in fact 70 to 80% of people in these databank studies have all the genes, all the prerequisite DNA, even some of the highest risk prerequisite DNA for schizophrenia, but never developed the condition. So if you remember in my theory, I spoke about how the attention should shift to childhood, but I'm just adding more clarity to this. In reality, what I think is ultimately happening is there is a difference between childhood onset, which is purely genetic, okay, and adulthood onset, which is epigenetic. Epigenetic is, and I spoke about this in a crazy rant of mine about what if the cure for schizophrenia is in whatever, but that was a while ago. But epigenetics is effectively, imagine that you've got your DNA here and it's in a nice line, And epigenetics in your environment tells your DNA what to read and what not to read. So it doesn't change your DNA, but it tells your DNA what to express and what not to express. So, for example, if I've got a finger and I'm strumming it on a guitar all the time, I get a callus, right? That's because this environmental trigger is bringing forwards the DNA to form a callus. That doesn't just activate on its own, it needs a trigger, it needs a stimulus to activate. And so adulthood onset schizophrenia, largely observed in the literature, has shown massive correlations, up to 80% in some studies, of people with schizophrenia having adverse childhood experiences. So this becomes less of a genetic condition. In fact, genetics do not cause the condition, because that's proven by all the various healthy controls having the exact same genes as people who develop adult onset schizophrenia, but not developing it. So we can almost do away with that, because all that the genes means is risk, doesn't mean destiny. The genes do not mean destiny, and in this case, the genes do not mean deterministic downfall. So you're not just going to get progressively worse. It's not neuroprogressive. Lots of the genes also, and this is the really interesting bit, lots of the genes that overlap with schizophrenia, so genes behind creativity, risk-taking and tolerance, things that are found in pro athletes, people who exceed and do exceptional things, which makes sense because people with psychoses face very extreme things and keep it together, I think, probably better than most people would. And in a sense, what I'm thinking with this, and it's quite hard to articulate really, is that people who develop adult onset schizophrenia have a specific subset of genes shown in the literature that could actually be utilized in a very, very beneficial way. So like an other face of the condition. This is one of my large issues with neurodivergency, because neurodivergency typically relates to mental illnesses as being neurodivergent. But what I think neurodivergence actually is the not in just the general sense that neurons go all over the place and we have just genetic drift that creates diversity, but the true neurodivergence is the healthy, positive manifestation of schizophrenia. Schizophrenics are shown to have the overlaps of genes that foster creativity, art production, and insight, and also amazing pattern recognition through synaptic genes that code for connection making in the brain. Which makes a lot of sense, because if you've experienced psychosis or any form of these kind of delusional abilities, say, it's very easy for you to construct a reality very quickly from faulty pattern recognition. And so what I'm kind of thinking is that the condition is just not being harnessed correctly. It's similar to how you think of the ADHD literature, where they did studies on children in schools and found that the children with ADHD actually excelled in natural environments. So if you took all the children from the class, which had a few ADHD kids in, out into the woods, the situation would be inverted. The ADHD kids would actually be leading the other kids around on exercises and keeping them all busy. That ADH all over the place is now helping the other kids feel involved in the group activities, and those kids are natural born leaders. And so the idea that's kind of being projected my way by observing the literature and just thinking about this and connecting it to my own experience is that perhaps from the way that we raise children at the moment is, no mystery, like a factory line. Everybody's got to sit still and go 3 to 5 p.m. and do all this sort of stuff, very heavily regimented. I mean, I think they still have bells in school, to tell them when lunch breaks are. It's very factory oriented. There isn't this diverse environment like there used to be in the past, where people had a wide range of things to do. And even if you didn't really fit into the world, even in the medieval period, you could pack a sword and travel the mountains if you wanted to. But in today's world, it's very suffocated and linear. And so we don't capitalize on these maybe high potential DNA sequences that could lead to very brilliant people. And so this then leads me into the idea of what a cure or what an effective treatment for psychosis would look like. And I kind of have this idea that if epigenetics can open Pandora's box, epigenetics can close Pandora's box again. And if anyone's ever experienced what delusions are like, you know very well that it's like a Pandora's box. It's like opening the gates of hell, and everything faulty that can possibly be ruminated on is. It's like a complete loss and disintegration into madness. But effectively, if we could create a good environment that harnesses the innate abilities of people with these exceptional genotypes and not look to the negative manifestation of them, but channel them into more positive routes, gain the trust needed to help someone calm down neurophysiologically, because that's a big thing as well, if you've seen my theory. And then also the deep need to explain the world. You know, when you think about early shamans, or you think about people that created and fostered early religions, prophets mainly, right? Even though that is behind a lot of religiosity. But remember, etymologically, religion just means to adhere to a structure, a fabric. And so when I think about the types of people that probably would have made these things, it makes sense for the isolated, for the ones who have run away from the system, to build something new. And so I feel like the reason that we haven't explored the proper path line for massive amounts of recovery and even larger amounts of prevention is that we don't understand enough about the human experience. And if we could understand enough about what makes humans nervous, what they ask questions about without condemning them for asking questions, but seeking to sincerely answer questions that are asked and settle paranoias that are very justified, we might be able to find a way of putting things back into Pandora's box and allowing the best expression of people with these neurodivergencies to manifest. That's what I think. And another core factor of that, and I've just forgotten it, and ultimately I think that pathway is a new emerging one. Obviously, a lot of the old literature, a lot of the psychiatric treatments today are very heavily involved in the old safe literature. I'm not saying that medication isn't useful, because it is. Helps temporarily deal with those imbalances. But what I'm saying is that now, with all this new literature, with all this new science, and the ability to just ask an AI a simple question, like everything I've said in this video, pause the video, type in what I've said to an AI program, and see if it can bring up all the studies related to what I've said. We have that ability now. In the past, we had to rely upon individuals who had education in order to convey what was in the texts and research to us. Now it's one AI search away. That's the healthy way to use AI, not to talk to it and have conversations, but to ask it a question and help it list off all the research and see if it's valid or not. But ultimately, I find it very interesting that potentially schizophrenia could be the worst manifestation of a set of DNA that actually has a very positive manifestation of the DNA. And so when you do think about history, you think about these prophets, these shamans, these exceptional leaders, where do they come from? Well, they have to come from some form of genetic difference. There are plenty of people that are just happy living a normal life, living within this structure. And I think that those are the majority. But I think there are many people out there who need to find the new pathways for themselves that restore peace to themselves, and also to evolve the literature and to evolve the world in general. You know, we all know that people, in the worst times, it's new individuals who rise to help the environment, to help the world heal, in a sense. And I know that it all sounds very romanticized, but I don't think it's too far-fetched from the literature. I'm not saying that people in their current form of schizophrenia or psychosis are healthy. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying, however, is that I think in exploring the things that do make people in those conditions unhealthy, we might find ways of restoring a better peace to the world. So let me give you an example. Phantom phone vibrations, right? Well-observed studies on this, and it's shown to happen in like 78-80% of medical students, and even more of the general population who are otherwise healthy. Now, in schizophrenia, you have olfactory, visual, and auditory hallucinations, But a phantom phone vibration is a hallucination all the same. And since in the sense it's quite a strong hallucination, to physically feel something vibrate on your body is quite a strong expectation-driven hallucination. And so maybe by aligning and looking at schizophrenic symptoms as a response from a dissociation from the environment and a difficult childhood, but just a more extreme version of it. Remember that if schizophrenic people with psychoses have an overlap of DNA that might not fit our current world, but is exceptional in its truest manifestation, the brains of people that go through these adverse experiences might manifest very adverse experiences as a reaction, just because the nature of their brains is like gasoline to those experiences, And so that's what I'm kind of thinking. Let me try and summarize that. I think that the proof is out, the literature shows, and even the studies of heritability show that genetics are not predeterministic. They do not predict schizophrenia. They might show high risk, but a better prediction of schizophrenia is adverse childhood experiences, poverty and all this stuff, traumas. And with the information of genetic overlap in creativity, resilience and risk tolerance in people with schizophrenia, it might be that people with these conditions are actually just manifesting the worst versions of themselves and need to be brought back to a healthy baseline so they can manage the best versions of themselves and bring that out of them. And that ties me into what I think would be an accurate treatment. So I think that once someone has got themselves in a mess and Pandora's box is opened, you're not just subjected to hallucinations and all of these things, you're subjected to a metaphysical landscape that no one on earth has mapped out correctly yet. And what I mean by that is we've got all these different religions, we've got all these different destabilizations in countries, politics and cultures, and all these different ways of seeing the world. We've got all of these paranormals, these ghost things in documentaries and all this stuff. And so when you're someone who has a dysregulated nervous system from childhood, and you have the risk DNA that makes your brain a little bit more creative than other people's and maybe quite bizarre and psychotic, trying to wrestle with all the metaphysical information in the world is nearly impossible. And so one of the things that I've talked about is trying to create a grounded philosophical framework that can just map out everything so that it makes sense. When we ask questions or when we have paranoias, to share those with people wholeheartedly and to talk about what the deeper meaning behind those things are, and to learn the difference between people that shut down debate and people that help increase and encourage debate. And one of the closing remarks I'll make from this video is that the more I learn about these conditions, the more I find how much of a shame it is that the responsibility of self-healing is falling upon the most vulnerable. It should act in some way, these experiences of people, to bring lots of people together to try and help with these experiences. And we often or not, one of the heavily stigmatized areas of schizophrenia and psychoses is to think people are crazy. But my argument, and from what I'm saying in this video, is I do not think they are crazy, but I think they are hypersensitized to things in the world of which other people are very comfortable ignoring. And I think if we can journey towards answering the things that need answering in the world, then we can journey towards finding pathways of recovery for people. Other than that, individual responsibility is important. In schizophrenia, psychosis, you've got to stop drinking and smoking and doing anything that's bad for you. You've got to stop eating poorly. You've got to try to sleep better. And in some way, those things are your only battle, And then the next thing is social ability. Find social groups that are nice and, friendly and open to discussion. I feel like the treatment to schizophrenia and psychosis is a holistic one. And by that I mean you get your diet right, you get your friends right, you get your habits right, and you focus on your self-discipline in the mind as well. Something that I've noticed is over the time and over the years, I've got a lot less tolerant of myself deviating into what I know to not be real and trying to absolutely check things is there substantive proof for this before I go off into this? Because again, if you've got those genetics, which do love to go off with things like that, then you've got to be very selective and very careful over your metaphysical landscape. And that's why I like Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is a way of just reducing the complexity and noise down to an experience, which I recommend you look into. It's very good. I wanted to go on a rant. I hope I made sense in that video, because it's a lot of information and a little bit of a rant and maybe a bit overly romanticized. But have a great day.